Hi, my name's Marcy, and I'm here to show you how to make whole wheat bread. I'm not an expert, but I can show you how I make my bread and have it turn out soft and great tasting. First, let's start with the things that you'll need. For measuring, you will need a 1 cup measure, a 1/3 of a cup measure, 1 tablespoon, and then you'll also need a liquid measure. I use a 2 cup measure, a pastry brush, a thermometer, like for meat, a thermometer like for candy or liquids, a rolling pin, a cooling rack, loaf pans, and a mixer. I use a Bosch mixer, a really old one, but you can also do it with a KitchenAid or other type of mixers. You just have to do it a little bit differently, and we'll show you how to do that later. Next are the ingredients. You'll want to start with your whole wheat flour. I grind mine fresh just before I'm ready to make bread, and then if I'm not going to use it, I just freeze it, and that locks in the nutrients. If you're not able to grind it fresh, you can buy whole wheat flour from the store, and it works just fine. You just lose a lot of the nutrients when it's not fresh. The next thing you'll need is yeast. This recipe calls for instant yeast, so make sure that that's the kind that you have, and we'll talk about maybe using the other later. You'll need vital wheat gluten, dough enhancer, salt, white sugar, vegetable oil, a vegetable spray. Next is your hot water, and you'll want that to be around 105 degrees and definitely no more than 110. And lastly, you'll have your eggs. Now for the instructions. Let's start with our empty bowl, and you can see with the Bosch, this is the great thing about a Bosch, it has the scraper and then also the hook that mixes it really well. And you can start with your 6 cups of whole wheat flour. So go ahead and just dump the 6 cups in. One-third of a cup of white sugar, 1 tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons instant yeast. I've never tried this recipe with the regular yeast. I suppose you could, and then just dissolve it and take that much of the water away from the recipe, but you'd have to try that. I always use the instant, and you don't have to dissolve it in the water first. It makes it a lot easier. 4 tablespoons vital wheat gluten. In white flour, the gluten is exposed, and so it automatically bonds, but you lose that a bit of gumminess, the bonding, in whole wheat flour. So you need to add the gluten. You can find that in your baking aisle at most stores. If you can't find it in your local store, specialty stores like health food stores usually carry it. And next you'll need 2 tablespoons dough enhancer. This can usually be found in the same place as your wheat gluten, and this just adds for longer freshness to your bread. Once you've got all the dry ingredients together, you want to mix it briefly just to make sure that they're well mixed up, and then it will be time to add your liquid. You're going to start with your water, and like I said, you'll want to do it at about 105 degrees. If you get it too much lower than that or too much higher, your bread is either not going to rise or it's going to be heavy, and you just need to make sure that the temperature is really close to that. After the water, we'll do 2 eggs. I always use whole eggs. I've never tried it with just egg whites, but if you wanted to experiment with that, you could probably replace 1 egg with 2 egg whites. And then 1/3 of a cup of vegetable oil. One of the reasons that I do the dry ingredients first is so that I don't have to use an extra measuring cup. Once you have all of the wet ingredients in, you'll want to mix it all together until it's well incorporated. It will be a very liquidy, sponge-like consistency. And then you'll need to let it rest for 10 minutes. Now letting it rest is what allows the gluten to bond together and makes for softer bread. Now you want to get your bread pans ready while that's resting. I use 4 loaf pans of regular size of 4 by 8 by 2.5 inches deep, and then 2 smaller ones to use up the extra dough. I place it on top of a cooling rack so that it raises properly, so that you don't get that hard, thicker bread layer at the bottom of your bread. And spray them lightly with cooking spray. Now you'll need to add the rest of the flour, another 6 cups. If you have a Bosch, you can watch for the signs of when you have enough flour. You'll see that it starts to pull away from the edges of the bowl. As it continues to mix, it will stay clean from the dough, and at this point you can just let the mixer do its work for the 10 minutes of mixing. If you have a stand mixer like a KitchenAid, you'll need to work with the dough with a heavy-duty spatula so that you can get to all of the flour off the bottom and on the sides of the bowl and let it get mixed into the rest of the dough. You may have to work with it the full 10 minutes to make sure that you don't get any flour clumps. It is possible that you may have to use slightly less or more of the 12 cups of flour recommended in this recipe. You'll just have to get used to the feel and the consistency of your dough, and then make sure that you mix it the full 10 minutes once all the flour is added. You'll need to prepare your countertop with your vegetable oil and use it generously so that nothing sticks. Never use flour because you don't want to add any more. Now the consistency of your dough needs to be so that it's a bit sticky with your dry hands, but if you add a little bit of oil to your hands, it's very easy to work with. And you'll kind of have to get used to the feel and be able to tell what your bread needs to feel like. Now we're ready to roll out the dough. You'll need to take a bit of dough and break it off. You don't want to pull and stretch those gluten bands, but break it off in a cutting type way, and then you'll need to roll it out. Now if you want to be precise, you can weigh it on a scale and then divide that with how many pans you need. I know that this recipe for my loaves is about 4 regular size loaf pans and 2 small ones. Now as you can see in this, I roll it out flat like cinnamon rolls in a way, and then roll it up tight, and then fold the ends together, pinch them, and then roll it a bit. Now this one was a little bit too big, I could tell, so I just pinched off the end and then just form it into a nice even loaf. Now again, just get another ball, and as you can see, if you get the wrong shape, you can just fold it back up into a new ball, tight, and start over. And if you start to pull too hard with your rolling pin, it's going to break and stretch that, and you don't want that either. So we'll start over again and roll it out. You want to make sure you get all the bubbles out. That's the point of rolling it with the rolling pin. It gets all those extra air bubbles out to make your bread not so airy and it doesn't dry out as fast. So I roll it up tight, lengthwise, and then take the ends and fold them over into the center, press it down tight, and then fold up each side into the center and pinch them together. And then you'll want to flip it over and roll it on the countertop to get it nice and even. And then at this point it has a nice loaf shape, and you just put it right into your pan. And this is what it looks like in the pan. At this point, you'll need to allow the dough to rise until it's double or triple in size. Once it gets to just over double, you'll need to turn on your oven and preheat it at about 340 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the oven is preheated and your loaves are now about triple in size, it's time to put them in the oven and let them bake for about 30 minutes. Every oven's going to be a little bit different, so you may want to adjust the temperature by 5 degrees one way or the other, and the minutes by a few minutes one way or the other. One way to tell if your bread is done is by using your meat thermometer and just sticking it to the center of the loaf, and it needs to be at about 200 degrees. It can be a little bit lower, but you don't have to check every loaf if you know that they're exactly the same size. I usually just check one and know that they're pretty close. So you want to take them out of the oven and place them right back on the cooling rack and let them cool. At this point, you'll need to either spread them, brush them with butter, or spray them with your cooking oil again. I like to use cooking oil and just lightly coat them. You'll need to let them cool slightly and then remove them from the pans and place them on the cooling rack. If you try to remove them too early, they're going to stick. Once it's finished cooling, you should have a nice soft loaf of bread. One way to keep them soft is not to let them sit out too long, and as soon as they're cool, put them in bags. I use twist tie bags, and that keeps them fresh on the counter, and then you can also place them in the freezer. We go through it so fast that it doesn't last more than a week. But I would guess you could keep it in the freezer for up to 2 weeks in that kind of storage. Hope you have found this useful and that you enjoy your bread.